Okay, well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The time is 8 o'clock in New York. It's 3 o'clock in Jerusalem and 3:30 in Tehran. Let's get started. 2 days ago, in the early hours of Saturday, June 13th, the Israel Defense Forces commenced a large-scale, highly choreographed, and highly coordinated set of operations in Iran. The operations included targeted assassinations, the bombing of nuclear sites, and the systematic downgrading of ballistic missile and drone capabilities, striking into the heart of Israel's most powerful and most menacing adversary. At this very hour, thousands of Israelis are in the sea, land, and air defending the lives and livelihoods of millions of Israelis at home, and just behind them, they are defending the Western world, of which Israel has made itself the indispensable moral capital. Ladies and gentlemen, we are meeting this evening in the opening days of one of the great wars in Zionist history. We cannot know how this war will turn out and what costs it will bear. Even great costs are possible here. All wars have such costs, but we have reason to hope that the war that began on June 13th could create the conditions for a fundamentally freer and more peaceful Middle East. My name is Jonathan Silver. I'm the Warren R. Stern Senior Fellow at Tikvah and the editor of Mosaic. Our purpose in convening this briefing is not to try and break the news or cover the news. By now, many people watching this program and joining us tonight have already listened to and watched other programs that cover the events by the hour and by the minute. Tikvah is an educational institution, and our purpose tonight is not to cover the happenings of the news cycle as much as it is to help our students, their parents, and their teachers, and our larger community of ideas discern the meaning of those events and the significance of what's happening. That's our aim this evening. Joining me is a very distinguished group of gentlemen. Elliot Abrams is the chairman of Tikvah, a senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations. He's the veteran of many high-level government posts in the State Department and in the White House. His last full-time job in government was as the U.S. Special Representative to Iran. John Spencer is the chair of Urban Warfare Studies at the Modern War Institute at West Point. He's the host of the Urban Warfare Project, and he's emerged over the last 2 years as the most sophisticated analyst of IDF operations in Gaza, working in English. Assaf Orion is a retired IDF brigadier general, a defense strategist, and the Liz and Moni Reuven International Fellow at the Washington Institute. Before retiring from active duty, he was head of the strategic division in the planning directorate of the IDF General Staff. And Amiad Cohen is the CEO of the Cherut Center, an important think tank in Jerusalem. Over the last 619 days since the war in Gaza began, Amiad has been leading soldiers as a major in the reserves, probably over 300 of them. He joins us this evening in the middle of the night from the northern border of Israel. Gentlemen, welcome. Elliot, I want to begin with you. And for those of our listeners and watchers who have not been glued to Twitter and the Times of Israel and the Washington Post and all the other news sources that we're all trying to take in, what has actually happened over the last 2 days?
Well, I want to start back a little bit further, very quickly. In 2007, Israel said to the United States, we have information that Syria is building a nuclear reactor, and we can't let that happen. We have to work on that together. And after 2 months of consultation, President George W. Bush said, we're going to take this to the IAEA and then to the UN. And Israel, Prime Minister Olmert said, actually, no, we're not. We're going to hit it. And Bush said, okay, you do what you have to do. I think we're seeing a bit of a repeat of that, where the United States was in favor of negotiation. The Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, said, negotiation is not going to do it. We need to hit this program. And it looks as if the President of the United States then said, okay, you do what you need to do. On Thursday, it would appear, on Tuesday, that conversation took place. And I mean, history will tell us what happened, but it seems as if the President Trump, then kept that information silent and has been, of course, ordering U.S. forces to defend Israel, as has happened in the last year. when there have been Iranian attacks. Now we have seen since Thursday this interchange with tremendous barrages of Iranian missiles, close to 300 now, shot at Israel, plus many, many drones. And some of those missiles, of course, have hit and caused destruction, death, and injury. The Israeli strike on Thursday was, I'll borrow a word from Donald Trump, was excellent. I'm sure we'll hear more about it. It was an extraordinary feat of arms. And it looks as if Israel is now methodically destroying the Iranian nuclear program, broadly defined to include research labs, storage units, centrifuges. Every part of it is now a target. And so far, the position of the United States and a number of other allies has been Israel has a right to defend itself and has a right to do what it's doing. As always happens, more diplomatic pressure will start to grow as the days go by. This is the history of Israeli efforts in Lebanon, in Gaza. Every time there's a crescendo of diplomatic pressure. Thus far, it's almost invisible. Now, it's been 3 days, and it will be interesting to watch in the coming days. Does that pressure begin to grow? Is the United States part of that pressure? But meanwhile, there's damaging targeting of Israeli civilian targets. It's important to say civilian by the Iranians, and damage to Iranian military, nuclear, and more recently, political and economic, meaning oil, targets. Why don't I leave it at that?
Assaf, just see if you can bring us into the war plan of the IDF, explaining what they hit, when, why now was so important. Meaning, bring us into the days and minutes before this strike commenced and explain what they were trying to achieve.
Good evening. Thank you for inviting. And I think I can happily say that I don't know what happened in the rooms, and this way I can speak about it more freely. Back in 2007, 8, something like that, as Elliot said, the discussions about striking Iran's nuclear project were already underway. And I started participating as a colonel. The main conditions to launch a strike back then were framed, and I think they're still holding these days, is the necessity. So we do it as a last resort. As the late Meir Dagan, chief of Mossad, would say, when you have the sword on your throat, and even the blade has started breaking the skin. So first, we have a necessity. And recent days said, or at least there were some reports from Israel, that the nuclear weapon program was reinitiated and speeding up, accelerating. The accumulation of material has been substantive. And in fact, Israel saw that it's the last moment in which it can prevent it. So some kind of a point of no return. The second element was capability. So Israel needed to be sure that whatever it does achieves the actual goal or objective of taking out what's needed to be taken out. And the third was legitimacy. As we heard from Elliot, I think that Israel got a kind of an okay by America. We're not joining, I think it said, but we're with you on the defense and so on. You have our blessing, but you break it, you own it. This is your war. On the operational level, I think it was indeed a feat. And what we've seen is a spectacular show of arms of a large, surprising, precise, very effective attack on several families of Iranian targets. First, I would say, not because of the purpose is going after the nuclear, but the actual choice of targets is by necessity and time sensitivity. The first to be hit before they go elsewhere are commanders and nuclear scientists. And these were hit in their homes or in their command posts and so on. And I think we read today that some of them were taken by car bombs inside Tehran. So the knowledge and command, I think, are among the first. In parallel, some things in the nuclear program which could have been moved. I guess this is why they were hit. So the rest will be taken care of later. The third family is air defenses to open up air superiority and allow Israel the freedom to operate in Iranian airspace. And when we are now seeing UAVs, hovering behind, above Iranian sky, hunting surface-to-surface launchers, that is a manifestation of the air superiority. And on top of that, it wasn't only kinetic air force with hundreds of planes, but also two additional parts on the offensive. Actually, a Mossad campaign with several moving pieces. I was quite surprised to see it in the press. Usually, you don't run and tell them how to find it and so on. But it included attacks from within Iranian soil, which greatly enhanced the efficiency and efficacy of the attack in Iran. And the last but not least is the protective or defensive element with missile defense, with aerial defense, with warning and sirens to the population to take shelter. So I think fantastic opening gambit. Then responses by Iran with salvos of heavy missiles on population centers. And I think we need to understand, unlike 2007, when we thought about one or two rounds, yes, waves of attacks, here we are talking about a prolonged campaign, which you hear our leadership talking about. The road to Tehran is paved from Israel, and the Air Force is preparing for an intensive and continuous work over Iranian sky against those specific targets. Nuclear, ballistic, air defenses, regime, and as much as our population center will continue to be struck, I think that also the Iranian economy is next in line. I will stop here.
Assaf, I think astute listeners to the answer that you just gave can pull apart potentially two separate war aims that I want to ask you about. One is the neutralization of Iran's nuclear threat, and the second is the Iranian regime. Those are not the same, and I think the Americans assess those differently, and I wonder if the Israelis assess those two war aims differently.
I would say that on the pure military side, it's the nuclear aspect, it's the ballistic aspect, because we see that Iran is using it against Israel in a profound way. So it's not only the missiles, launchers, bases, and so on, but also the factories that were supposed to greatly widen this. The initial statements were not against the regime, but later statements said, well, we hadn't started this way, but it may go this way if things go badly. And I think it's a message, a At least I cannot say that it's a stated objective right now, but as I started, I'm not in the rooms, so I may only speculate.
Well, Elliot, I will want to come back to this because I think that the way that the Israelis prioritize these war aims will have a great effect on the American domestic support and perhaps even joining in with the Israeli effort. But John, I want to come to you and ask what you, someone who studies weapons and tactics, what you have learned from the operational art and the technological capabilities of the Israelis over the last couple of days.
Well, I've learned in studying Israel's military operations from the Six-Day War. I mean, before that, is never be surprised at or underestimate the Israeli operations. This one, I'll assess basically from the first phase. We could even go to strategic on clear messaging on what the objectives are, and strategy is a process, not a plan. So even the objectives can change in the war based on the events on both sides.
Go on, John.
Okay, so from the operational, right? So the sheer redefinition of what shock and awe means. The strategic surprise is still a core element of operational art, and how Israel synchronized not just an airstrike, but a multi-domain offensive that combines cyber, human intelligence, electronic warfare, special operations, even psychological operations. And that achieving strategic surprise on a modern battlefield is not easy with ubiquitous satellite imagery, everything. Most of the time people can see things in advance. So that's a huge lesson of this operation. But as was previously mentioned, just a deep intelligence penetration in human terrain that was a part of this operation to achieve this shock and awe. Not only did they know where the nuclear scientists and the IRGC commanders were, and what we know now is that they manipulated the general schedule and lured multiple of them into a same underground facility, and then hit that in the opening hours and killed 4 major commanders. That's like, taking out the leadership of the German army on the opening day of D-Day. It's just incredible. And something I often say, studying multiple wars, that war is always a combination of low tech and high tech, right? So the evolving character of warfare, it's always evolving new technologies. But this operation again showed how it was a combine of very advanced technologies like the F-35, which Israel has made better since October 7th, adopting it so it can drop munitions. But because of the way that the intelligence operation, the fact that the Mossad agents also infiltrated drone parts and assembled drone parts inside of Tehran or inside of Iran, and used those in combination to create the opening for the strategic surprise. So they assembled cheap, ubiquitous drones and then sent those drones out to hit radar systems, missile, basically air defense and missile ballistic radars, create the opening for the Air Force to come in. And really did, which is hard to explain, but created air supremacy without air superiority. It's not like they controlled all of Iranian sky, but they created corridors where all of the Air Force could get into their objectives, hit with precision, and then get out successfully with 0 casualties. An added element of this, again, this wasn't just shock and awe, cause pain on the regime for the ballistic program, the nuclear program, and the leadership. It also crippled the retaliation. So in this opening salvos, these opening phases, five waves basically, Israel was able to target what they knew would come as well, which would be the retaliation. Not just the head of the missile command that you would need, but also the mobile trailers. Many of these drones would target the mobile trailers that they knew that the ballistic missiles would have to use. So it really crippled the actual retaliation that they figured would come, and reduced Iran's ability to respond down to what is believed to be 200 ballistic missiles at a time, which is greatly reduced from what is possible. The psychological effect can't be just like Israel's operations against Hezbollah with the walkie-talkie and the strategic, basically decapitation of the leadership over a matter of 2 weeks. But this was a psychological operation. If you can hit all of those commanders in a single operation, basically a single night, it makes it so not a single commander can trust where they're going to be, and you cause that almost paralysis. There are a lot of lessons here for the United States, in that the fact.
But by the way, John, on that last point,
Yeah.
that is that's my own guess as to something that Assaf mentioned before, which is the fact that these Mossad operatives were constructing a drone facility inside Iran is one thing. The fact that footage of that was then leaked is something else. And my own interpretation would be that the leaking of that footage was designed to have a psychological effect, to reveal to everyone, for everyone with social media to see just how thoroughly penetrated Iran is.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
That level of fear leads to decision making beyond personal decisions. It really leads to a paralysis and a strategic effect. So that can't be discounted. A lot of lessons here for for others, and we'll see where this goes in the continuing lesson. Like I said, redefining the operational art on the modern battlefield. And I can go through some of the lessons that I've already taken, that I haven't mentioned yet if you want me to, or we can save it till later.
Well, I mean, I think John mentioned that successful conduct of war always requires both a technological superiority and the low-tech will of the women and men who actually need to wage that war. And it's to that I want to turn with you. Look, I think before this campaign began, we would have looked at Israel and said to ourselves, look, it's 600 and however many days in which the citizen soldiers of the IDF have been leaving their businesses, leaving their families, leaving their studies, leaving the fathers are leaving the birth of their children and going to serve in the reserves. And you just have to ask yourself I mean, that there have been such high rates of return is amazing, is miraculous. But you have to ask yourself, how much can you test this population and this society? Israel has now undertaken a harder, bigger, stronger, tougher adversary. And I want to ask you, if you can just tell us, you're serving in the reserves right now, what you can tell us about the will of Israel to take on this fight.
First of all, thank you for having me. I will start an open that don't believe CNN, Haaretz, and other media in Israel. We're strong, we're resilient, and we believe that we're doing everything's needed, and we don't have really other options. I can't move to Florida tomorrow morning. I'm here, and we're here to stay, and we're here to win. And that's the spirit of big majority of the population in Israel, which doesn't reflect in mainstream media. The second thing is, I think this operation in Iran is definitely a process of what started on October 7th. We would have had the opportunity to attack in Iran without destroying Hamas and Hezbollah up north. We were deterred to attack in Iran because of, we call it the circle of fire that surrounded Israel, with long-range and short-range ballistic missiles from Hezbollah that would have supposed to destroy Tel Aviv and Israel while we were attacking Iran. The process that happened since October 7th did two things. The first thing, it took the Israeli population that had a deep understanding about the threat, that you can see the enemy and you can understand in depth that this is it's not an existential, but it's their brutal enemies that we need to defeat, and we cannot live anymore with this gun to our head. That's one hand. And the second hand, you can see the process of success, because since October 7th, the big failure of the Israeli, let's say, strategy and tactical level, we moved to the offensive since then, and we went from success to success. It started gradually, but we did things in Gaza we never believed we will ever do. And then we did in Lebanon things that we never believed we were able to do. And that success is actually giving the people of Israel a lot of power and motivation to continue the war and to end. And I think if you try to understand where the people of Israel today, you just need to close your eyes and imagine Israel without a real enemy. Imagine Israel without Iran, without Hezbollah, without Hamas, it's a different Israel. We call it in our think tank, we call it Pax Israeliana. Imagine the Middle East with Israel as a central power that actually creates a new order in the Middle East. Imagine that. Imagine Israeli GDP, and in that scenario, and that gives us a lot of motivation to spend even 100 more days in Miluim today in the reserves, because we're changing the history of the Jewish people. It's not only the state of Israel, 3,500 years of history, 2,000 years of exile, 75 years of fighting for our existence. And maybe in a month or two from now, we will be liberated for, let's say, 20, 30, 40 years, no one knows, from a real enemy. And that's something that is motivating the people here. We believe in a very good future, and optimistic. So I will not stop now going to reserve because of the technical challenge now.
So this is a question both for you, Amiad, and for you, Assaf. Amiad, I'll ask you to go first. But how do you see the initiation of this set of campaigns in Iran as it relates to Gaza and concluding the war there?
I think everyone knew that the end game will be Iran. And by the way, going to the previous question, I think toppling down the regime is the #1 goal, but no one will say that because it's politically complicated to argue for that. But at the end, we learned, the lesson learned is we cannot have a regime that wants to kill us and destroy us on our border. Practically, the goal is to eliminate their abilities, but at the end, the real goal is to eliminate the people who want to destroy us. I think the war in Gaza and the war that we had in Lebanon are on their way, but they're secondary now to the real enemy, and they were funded by Iran. So if we see what's happening today, the second we chop down the head of the snake, it will enable and weaken Hezbollah in the north. I'm now practically sitting here in the northern border, defending the northern border and trying to prevent Hezbollah, which, let's say, has still the will to destroy Israel today, but lacks the ability thanks to a year and a half of battle up here in the north, which we totally took apart Hezbollah part by part and prevented them from being a real threat to Israel. The battle in Gaza, I think, is also on the way to end. I believe the real shift in strategy that started a month and a half ago when Israel switched the chief of staff and switched the defense minister, shifting the strategy to two main pillars which were prevented by the chief of staff in the beginning, is occupying territory and separating the population from the Hamas regime. It's the beginning of the end of the Hamas operation, the war in Gaza. And I believe that in 30 to 60 days, it will be over by a real clear surrender of Hamas in the Gaza Strip. So I'm very optimistic in all our fronts. I believe we're on the right track. It took time. It wasn't planned to be like this. Not the operation in Gaza, not the operation in Lebanon, definitely not the operation in Iran, but it evolved in some way that the attack from Hamas in the south opened the opportunity to destroy Iran.
How do you see it, Assaf?
Well, there's a lot to unpack, and I find myself, a bit reserved about attributing the so far design of the campaign to general officers, when the design of the campaign is first and foremost the responsibility of the political level. And the fact, as you can read in my recent piece in Foreign Affairs, is that so far Israel waged two campaigns in Gaza with two different strategic concepts, and wasted a lot of time. And in my view, since this is a grave violation of our national security doctrine, there needs to be ulterior motives to explain why it takes so long, and why so much time, treasure, and blood were wasted in procrastination. But putting that aside with Gaza, and I really recommend whoever wants to understand more of my thinking is to read my recent piece. But on Iran, I think there is a sense of understanding of the urgency, of the necessity, of the need to take care of that problem. And this is how it goes. Now, it's not just politically incorrect to say that the campaign goal or the war goal in Iran is a regime change. I think modestly we need to look at the mirror and ask ourselves, is it a job in Israel's size to change regime in an 80 million people nation, which does not have, Amiad said, on our border. Iran does not have a border with Israel. It tried to create borders, but it does not. So I think we need to be humble and realistic in what we can achieve and what we can't achieve. Kinetically, we can do a lot of things. Changing regimes, let's ask ourselves how comfortable Israel is with its own government in the last 2 years, and then ask ourselves questions about other people's regime change. So I think we need to stay focused on our existential threats, on our severe security threats, on the enemy's capabilities on nuclear, on missiles, on proxy. All of these are underway and I think are working well. We shouldn't be now delirious and said, oh, we can have it all. We can now have 600 days of ballistic exchanges with Iran. We cannot. We need to bring it to a closure after we achieve our main goals and objectives before we get delirious and outstretch ourselves.
But Assaf, there's a question there too embedded in your answer, which has to do not with Israel's desires, but with Iran's desires. And I suppose I'd formulate the question like this: whether the Iranian regime would in fact be willing to survive, if it had the nuclear program taken away from it, if Israel is successful in fully neutralizing the capability of its nuclear arsenal, would the regime survive? Not because Israel wanted to or doesn't want it to, but on its own, of its own volition, of its own force.
My experience is that we need to be humble. It was very good to see Assad fall and Syria, change its regime. Was it our direct objective? No. It was an unintended consequences, which I think we're happy with. If the regime in Iran would fall, I think it would be good. Should we set it as an objective in which until it is achieved, you cannot stop the war? No, I think we shouldn't.
So I want to bring this exact conversation as one of the axial pivots in American domestic policy and the Trump administration's own deliberations over how to proceed. Elliot, the MAGA camp is split down the middle on this question. I think that the specter of the global war on terror looms very large in at least part of the way that the MAGA movement thinks about regime change and American involvement in the Middle East. Tell us how you analyze these different factions within the administration.
I would say the administration is basically divided into two parts. One of them is the many, many officials, maybe including the vice president, but many who are isolationists or are restrainers, who think mostly about the model of Iraq and don't want the United States to get involved at all. That's one group. And the other group is called Donald Trump. It's a very odd thing because he's not one of them. He shares some views with them. But we see this in the last few days in his reaction. I mean, theoretically, he could have really reacted strongly against Netanyahu and said, don't do that. Don't do that. There'll be a rupture in relations. That's not what he said. He's been really quite supportive. He has not wanted the United States to attack Iran unless Iran attacks us. And he's made it very clear if Iran, which threatens to attack U.S. bases, ever does attack a U.S. base, they'll pay a very heavy price. But it is a very odd division. I mean, we've all seen or heard about people like Tucker Carlson really viciously attacking Trump policy this week. And I would say, generally speaking, the MAGA movement is not supportive of the president's position of strong support for Israel. Now, why he allowed all of these people to get high positions throughout his administration is a very good question. On the question you were just debating, Trump is famously unsympathetic to the idea of regime change, really anytime, anywhere. And would, I think, be unsympathetic to an Israeli war aim of regime change, because as Assaf says, nobody knows how long that will take. It could happen tomorrow, and it could not happen for years and years and years. We really are unable to predict these things. So I think if Israel is trying to get American and more broadly Western support for its program, talking about the nuclear program, the need not to damage the nuclear program, to destroy the nuclear program to the extent possible, it's going to have a lot more support than any discussion of regime change. It is true that the ultimate solution is the fall of this regime, which is devoutly hoped for, prayed for by the people of Iran, who hate this regime. But I would agree with Assaf that that's not Israel's job, and it isn't clear how through military action it could achieve that.
John, I want to go back to the question of how Israel can actually achieve the war aim that seems to be the higher priority. More precisely, neutralizing its nuclear arsenal. Now, we know that in the opening days of this campaign, Israel has struck a great many sites in which nuclear power had been enriched to such a degree that it could have been weaponized and then put on missiles directed at Israel and elsewhere. However, the most secure of those sites in Fordo, it has often been said, Israel does not have the capabilities to, by themselves, neutralize that. I wonder if you still think that that's true. How would you analyze Israel's options when it comes to the Fordo nuclear facility?
Well, it's interesting that they named their operation into Syria to hit a site which was not as deep, but at a very deep range where they didn't have the bunker busters to reach. The operation was called Operation Many Ways. And there's many ways to attack a site that doesn't include, you need one bomb that can reach a depth. Israel is infamous at this point, after Nasrallah, Mohammed Deif, after Mohammed Sinwar, at drilling, the ability to drill down. In Operation Many Ways, they put special forces on the ground to go into the site and blow it up from the inside. For me, there are some specifics, both on the tactical, destroy versus what the objective that the prime minister, I heard say in the opening days, was roll back. And I think that we're trying to combine, or they're trying to combine, both military and political means. And I think that President Trump's, I don't think it's disingenuous offer to say, look, now you should, to the Ayatollahs, come to the table to discuss the dismantling of it. Israel does have a limitation on what it can do to roll back, but I mean, it's not just the physical sites of Natanz and Fordo and the depth of them and the centrifuges and what the uranium that's already enriched to a certain 60% level. It's also those nuclear scientists. It's also the missile programs. It's comprehensive, the role of the program back a certain, but to destroy the program, again, there are limitations to not being on the ground that you can do to destroy. So it's both a tactical, but also a strategic question. I mean, ultimately, as you get to farther down in the strategy, is the strategy to force a political, basically, settlement saying, we will abandon this, and could the regime survive if it abandoned its nuclear program altogether?
Assaf, how far do you think this program, the nuclear program, has been rolled back?
I think it's too early to say. and it will take us more time to take care of additional parts and even more time to understand what we've achieved. But since this is a very old problem, I think we should remind ourselves, Iran is a large country and its nuclear aspirations mean that its efforts are regenerating. Whatever you roll back will start growing again under a new situation. So I think we need some rollback to a point from which another position or another solution and additional campaigning will be needed to continue rolling them back until they let go or until the regime falls. So I think it's a austerity campaigning, but it doesn't mean perpetual war. And we need this combination of what Israel now does, and I think President Trump hit it right on the head, saying we can now go back to negotiation. And I told you there will be a calamity if you don't come. So it's what we call in the Middle East, we explained well the alternative to no agreement.
Ahmed, we were speaking a while ago about how the possibility of this campaign in Iran is a function of earlier Israeli successes against Hezbollah in Lebanon. In other words, the operations against Iran's proxies had an effect on Israel's ability to target the head of the snake itself. Now, I wonder if that dynamic might go in the other direction too, that Israel is focused so precisely on Iran, what you might be worried about in the Palestinian territories, the regenerative power of Hezbollah in Lebanon, in Judea and Samaria and the West Bank, in Gaza itself.
So obviously we are thinking about these threats today. The IDF summoned hundreds of thousands of reservists back on the day of the attack. And they're defending these borders. I will add two other borders here. I will add the Egyptian border and the Jordanian one. The Jordanians, we have a 350 kilometers border between us and Jordan, which Jordan is 80% Palestinians and jihadi Sunnis who support a lot of them, the Muslim Brotherhood and ISIS, which might be willing to attack now Israel, seeing the successes we have around us. Another border as we started is the Lebanese border. Unfortunately, Israel during this war, and I was criticizing that in the past, did not destroy Hezbollah and force them to surrender, but we got to a limit where we weakened them so they cannot threaten us anymore in the meantime, but they're obviously continuing to rebuild themselves, which Hezbollah is still some kind of a threat and has a lot of capabilities despite all the successes we had in front of Hezbollah. They aren't strong as they used to be, but they still are a real threat, which with invasion capabilities and with some kind of medium-range missiles and rockets that will not be a real existential threat to Israel and will not deter Israel from attacking in Iran, but are still a threat. The only place that we actually don't have a real threat is in Gaza. And that's the only place where we are trying to have a regime change and we are trying to dismantle a real existing state and trying to change the way that that country treats us and thinks about us. And I think that needs to be a representative of how we address our enemies. I agree. Israel has a limitation of power in changing regimes. Every power has its limits on how you can use it. But I think the Gaza and the Hezbollah example are good projections on how we need to think about it. Well, the conception in Israel was we have people who don't like us. They're jihadists, but they're rational people. And we have a limit on what the abilities that they have to attack us, but we can't enforce the willingness. That's what we called Kira Barzel, Jabotinsky's iron wall, that we assume they will always hate us. but limit their capabilities in military and kinetic perspectives. I think the lesson learned of the conception is we cannot let them have a regime that they control territory without paying a real significant price and having a real threat on us. I think the IDF actually succeeded in doing that between 2011-12 in Syria, where they tried to build a real military force to attack Israel from the Syrian border, and the terrorists surround us from the northern east. And we succeeded to prevent a real leadership, local leadership, to rise there under the Assad very weak regime since 2009 till today, actually. I think at the end, we have no other alternative but weakening the countries around us and having some kind of relationship with them. Having a real enemy that sits on our border and wants to destroy us brought us to October 7th. Us accepting it brought us to October 7th, and we need to verify that we don't have any more enemies like that around us. And Egypt can be something like that. There's a big majority of Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, and looking forward. And the second we destroy the Shiite jihadist, we will look forward to having a challenge from the Sunni jihadists on a 10, 15, 20-year horizon.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for your questions. If you would like to ask anything of Elliot, John, Assaf, Amiad, please write your question into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. I see dozens of them already in. Elliot, here's a question about whether it is essential to destroy the economic engine of the Iranian regime, targeting refineries and gas fields to make sure that it doesn't have as efficient a regenerative capacity of the kind Assaf was discussing.
This should not be the primary target. The primary target should be Iran's capability to harm Israel. So that means missile launchers, missile sites, plants where they build more missiles, and of course it means the entire nuclear infrastructure. The economic targets are, from that point of view, I think, secondary. Part of what Israel is doing, I think, may be a message to Iran. This can get a lot worse for you if you don't stop the targeting of civilian targets. Israel's not going to respond by trying to kill innocent Iranians and attack shopping malls. But attacking the economic targets is, I think, a way of telling the Iranians, watch out about the targeting. And as you're suggesting, or as the questioner asked, it weakens Iran. It weakens Iran, depending on how much damage is done, for a long time. And Iran is completely vulnerable now, since Israel controls the skies. You could see a situation in a matter of days in which Iran's ability to export oil is largely compromised. And that compromise could last for weeks or months, or it could last for years. Would that bring regime change? I think, that's unclear. I mean, it's really hard to predict regime change, but it's certainly true that it's something the regime has to think about. Again, they have a restive population that very largely hates the regime. If the regime, through its insistence on a nuclear weapons program, immiserates the people further, they will be even more deeply against the regime. I mean, this regime has been around since 1979, and it has done nothing for the Iranian people. Nothing. It has spent hundreds of billions of dollars on this nuclear weapons program, on supporting Hezbollah, on supporting Hamas, on supporting the Houthis, and it really doesn't care about the people of Iran, which is why I am very optimistic that they will overthrow it. I think we just can't predict the timetable.
Assaf, I want to try to steelman the argument to make the best version of the argument within the MAGA coalition, within the Trump administration, that wants to restrain America's presence in this fight. And I think that the best articulation of that argument is that America has one strategic adversary. That strategic adversary is China, and everything else is a distraction. Now, I want to ask you to engage this argument. Israel's commencement of this operation in Iran, but from the perspective of this great power competition between America and China, clearly that is result. I suppose the question is, first of all, how you think that the Chinese might look at what's happened, and how you think the Americans should look at what's happened.
Well, it's a great question because it goes back in many ways to how some Americans look at the great power competition and attribute the great power competition to the Indo-Pacific, while the Middle East is some kind of, a relic of the global war on terror. So it's the place of the great and wrong interventions in Afghanistan and Iraq, while Russia and Ukraine is some, glacier from the Cold War. Actually, it's all connected. You see North Koreans and Iranians fighting in Ukraine. You see the weapon systems and the knowledge coming back and forth. You see China very interested in how America and its best allies are shooting down drones and missiles. Actually, we're seeing the so-called axis of evil or upheaval, or the Euro-Asian China, Iran, Russia, and North Korea axis. It's a learning network. And this network is learning how the West fights in order to defeat it. China loses no time studying what Iran is doing. Politically and diplomatically, it again took a stand and condemned Israel's violation of Iranian sovereignty, but never bothered to say anything about the sovereignty of Iraq, Jordan, and Israel that Iran is violating while shooting things over it. I think that everybody is looking at that because it's a test that will reflect how the US stands by its allies. And right now, the ally is Israel, by the way, fighting most of the war on its own without US involvement, except maybe the THAAD battery. But on the gallery watching are Taiwan, Japan, Korea, Germany, NATO, and everybody is saying, well, can the US be trusted? I think, and in this, I think I hold a wider sense of what is America first. America first is the first one you call when something bad happens and you want somebody trustworthy to stand by you when it hits the fan. So I think that in this sense, Iran is a test. It's not only an expenditure of weapon systems and so on, but it's a real test to the mettle of US and its allies, the weapon systems, the doctrines, success, and so on and so forth. And I think it's only widening and expanding the US power in the Indo-Pacific context, and not just spending and refocusing. Whatever happens in Iran will influence what happens in Taiwan. We should just watch the Chinese observing it, and we will understand that this is so.
John, there are several questions that have come in about Iran's own offensive capabilities and the Iranian Air Force. Can you tell us anything about them?
They don't really have much of an air force. It's really their investment in their ballistic missile program. And again, without knowing what has been eliminated, it was vast. It was the greatest threat, was not just the nuclear progression of the nuclear program, but was also the progression of the ballistic program. I mean, 2 weeks ago, Iran tested the largest ballistic missile they've ever tested, a 2-ton ballistic missile. And the United States had basically sanctioned the U.S. Treasury Department 2 months ago, Chinese and others trying to provide Iran with the capability to have intercontinental ballistic missiles. The Air Force of what it had and what its investments were very minimal. And this again leads to why it's not precise in its retaliation, where it could be aiming for something, but it's hitting and targeting civilian targets. That what's left of their ballistic missile program and these roving, and why they invested so much in these mobile firing systems. They invested heavily in Russian air defense systems that were shown back in April and October of 2024, not to be a good investment, but they probably didn't have time to reinvest, although they mostly S-300s, but they do have some S-400s. But offensive capability, very limited besides those, which are still very lethal, an abundance of drones, which we have seen, where the Iron Dome and David Sling and Arrow 3 and the THAAD and the Patriot are very effective systems. But even if it's 95% effective, if you swarm something, some things might be able to get through. But we're seeing each round of its repetition, and we don't know if I don't know if Iran is holding anything. I kind of have my own doubts that they're holding anything, but really limited offensive besides that ballistic missile program.
We are all impressed, wowed, dazzled by the innovation that Israel showed by erecting this forward drone operating base inside Iranian territory. There are a number of questions that have come in asking about whether the reverse is possible and how vulnerable Israel might be to the presence of similar capabilities inside Israeli borders.
Is that for me?
Yeah, do you know?
Although I've spent time with Israeli intelligence services, I wouldn't be able to say that that's not possible. I mean, this is the second iteration, right? We saw this during Operation Spider's Web with Ukraine and Russia, and it has signaled to the world that your old way of thinking about border security and protecting your strategic infrastructure needs to be updated. But this goes to Elia's comment of the 80 million people in Iran. Most of them hate the regime. That creates intelligence opportunities to infiltrate within the society. It wasn't just the low tech getting into the country. It was knowing exactly where to send the tech to, based on, and you need human intelligence for that. Although even since October 7th, the Israeli intelligence service have caught like Iranian back for, and basically double agents and things trying to do this. I don't think personally, again, John Spencer, that there's any capability for Iran to do that in Israel. But this was a second notice to the world.
Here's the last question that I wanted to ask to each of you as we go on. Assaf, if you have something else to add, you should please add it. I'll come to you first. But here's my final question. For now, in this round of the conflict, what does victory actually look like? What is some kind of settlement actually? How does some kind of settlement manifest? And crucially, who are the decision makers responsible for that settlement? Assaf, I'll come to you first.
Just a small note on Iranian infiltration. We already have dozens of cases of Israelis working for Iran from reasons mostly financial, reporting from within Israel. On top of that, you have a huge Iranian effort to arm and militarize the West Bank, which geographically is inside Israel. And you have all the ring of fire around us, which again, geographically, they launched short-range rockets, which for strategic effect. So Iran is already doing it. We are just doing it our way. We're a little different in style. About how victory looks and how it ends, I think Israel needs. It has like two issues here. One is how to stop the fighting. Termination of such a fighting is uneasy. You sometimes need to escalate to persuade the other side to stop. Iran just said, we will not come back to negotiation as long as we're attacked, which tells you, okay, if you stop attacking, maybe we'll come back to negotiation. But at the end of the day, we need to create this mechanism in which the military campaign degrades a lot of capabilities in Iran and also persuades them, not to say compels them to accept more agreeable terms in the negotiation. But basically, the final phase is some kind of agreement to which Israel is not a side. It will be US, Iran, or US and friends with Iran, agreed with Israel about the conditions, but making sure that Iran will never have the capability to decide and go to a weapon and reach there alive. So I think that's the end state. It ends up diplomatically, but that's not a bug, that's a feature.
John?
Look, I mean, there's three reasons people go to war, fear, honor, and interest. So it only ends when you've resolved one of those. So I do think the United States is really the main broker that can bring the operation to an end, as in bring them to the table with certain assurances. With Israel, it has to be a complete dismantling, and all the necessary parts and components to inspections and all of that of any pursuit of any nuclear. And the president had gotten to that point, and really the confliction within our own administration on what does enrichment mean, a little bit, no, zero. And it would take that to, I think, end this fighting, because other than that, at this point, you have a bit of honor within the retaliation at phase of portions of it. When keeping the objective limited, I think is really key for Israel. Like Assaf said, like, while the byproducts can be many things, the objectives are very limited, and that way you can end it within that limited framework.
Miad.
Sorry. I think it's complicated to articulate exactly how it's going to end. I think it depends on so many parameters that it's very hard to assess. I think, yes, it will obviously end in a diplomatic way, but the question is how much leverage and how much military success we will achieve. That's why it's always connected to what's happening in Gaza and what's happening in Lebanon. It's all connected to each other. If we create a place that we have, as the phrase is, total victory, in a place that the enemy brings up a white flag and surrenders, that will be obviously desirable. And I hope that was going to happen in Iran. And I think we need to at least work in some ways to achieve that. Is it possible to happen eventually? I don't know. So when you address the 100% of what you want, and that's have a decisive victory on your enemy, and you're achieving their total surrender for our usage of power, because we won't have a second opportunity to attack the nuclear facilities in Iran. And if we don't destroy and give peace to our people for the next 40 years, we failed our mission. So I think we need to continue fighting until we assess in some ways that we will get there. Would it be only militarily, and like the northern border of Israel in 73 with the Syrians, if you don't have a real agreement, but we got to some kind of status quo that they never attacked us again, that's a good thing. Or if we have a peace process that I can go and as the Israeli Oslo people said, and I can eat hummus in Damascus, or I can eat whatever they eat in Iran, and I can go visit there, that's desirable too. Will that happen? I don't know. I believe we need to at least push for there and compromise on what we can get in the middle.
Elliot, you have the last word.
I think one has to remember this is a highly ideological regime, which is really built around death to Israel, death to America. This regime will not abandon those goals, nor, I think, just because of this terrible defeat it has suffered, will it agree to anything more than a truce. Its main goal in the short run is regime survival. And to agree, we will never do any of this stuff again. They won't agree to that, because that will make them look weak in the eyes of their neighbors and, above all, of the Iranian people. So I think the most you can hope for realistically is a truce. And therefore, I think, as Amiad was just saying, Israel should try to achieve as much as it can in the destruction of the Iranian nuclear program through bombing. I think, therefore, that it should not agree, Israel should not agree to shortening this effort, shortening this war until it has achieved most of what it wants in the destruction of the nuclear program.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for teaching us this evening. Ladies and gentlemen, with that, we'll adjourn.